All right, hello and welcome to another episode of Around the Horns. I am Aaron, and I'm here as always with my co-host Zach. We have quite a bit to talk about today, given that the Horns are right in the thick of another competitive Big 12 race. We're going to talk a lot about the Big 12 today. We're going to recap the series against TCU. We're going to do a little power rankings, mix it up a little bit there, and then we are going to, of course, preview the Thursday, Friday, Saturday series against Kansas State this weekend. But before we get to all that, Zach, how you doing today?
Doing good. Ready for some baseball this weekend. I guess they're moving up because of Easter, and so there's a lot to talk about there.
Yeah, scheduling games around Easter. Interesting. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so we are in the thick of it, Zach. We're going to get into a lot of Big 12 talk later, but before, Texas took home a big series this weekend against TCU. They were back home at the Dish. There were a ton of fans there all weekend, so it was a really good showing by the UT fan base. But Pete Hansen was the story on Friday night. You know, everyone knows it. Complete game, shutout, 12 strikeouts, gave the bullpen the entire night off. Zach, what was the main thing that stood out with you about Pete Hansen on Friday?
You know, Pete, he's not an overpowering guy like we've talked about, but he came out and he was ready to execute a pitching plan. And him and Allen, obviously, you know, they worked together and they came up with a plan of how they were going to attack the top of that lineup. And that's what they did. I mean, they came in and they shut him down. They didn't allow a lot of free passes. He had one or two walks maybe. But he just executed. I mean, it was pure just Hansen at his best.
Yeah, no, the fastball command was amazing. I mean, whether it's a right-handed batter or a left-handed batter, he's going inside with the fastball. He's going outside with the fastball. We know he's got that slider in his back pocket anytime he wants it. And it's just been really incredible. He had a great quote after the game. I asked him, you know, how he keeps getting better and what his motivations are. And he just said he wanted his name up on the wall up at UFC Dishwalk Field, which Taylor Youngman is getting added to after they announced they're going to retire his number. But all the great Texas legends, a lot of great pitchers up there. And that is Pete Hansen's goal. So we will see if he'll be able to achieve that. But man, that complete game shutout was very special to watch. But unfortunately, on Saturday, Tristan Stevens was not able to replicate that performance. For the second time in 2 weeks, he got touched up. He wasn't able to make it to the third inning. It wasn't a good start for Tristan. TCU hit him around a little bit. The first inning, he kind of got dinked and dunked. There was a missed fly ball by Dylan Campbell. Then the second inning rolled around, and that's when TCU really started to find the barrel. They put one over the wall. They started to find the gap. How are you feeling about Tristan Stevens right now? I know last time we completely gave him the benefit of the doubt. Probably a little bit more concerned now, but still not a guy we want to bet against. That's kind of where I'm at. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that, we talked about this in the notes after the show or after the game, but he was the guy that he was in the dugout for a good 30, 45 minutes. Pierce said afterwards that he felt responsible. He let his team down. He's a guy that's going to own it. He's going to use that as motivation. He's going to come back. And so kind of the way he came back against OU, where he just got no run support at all.
Yep.
I really expect him to come out firing on all cylinders against K-State. I think he's going to use it as motivation to say, look, I'm not that kind of pitcher. And he has that bulldog mentality about him. That we kind of knew that there was something going on even before the Tech game, because Pierce had mentioned that he had been putting in a lot of bullpen work, that he'd been considered for a Tuesday night role, but they hadn't used him because he really needed to be in the bullpen.
Yep.
So it sounds like that slider has been an ongoing issue for a couple of weeks. That slider is vastly important for him because he's a contact hitter. And when you pitch to contact, especially at a big ballpark like Dishwalk Field, it's going to drop in it occasionally. And he had two bloop hits. DC dropped a third out. So he had some really bad luck, but again, he's a contact hitter. So once he really went away from the slider completely and just went straight cutter and fastball in that second inning, that, like you said, that's when they really touched him up. And so, yeah, not all hope is lost, but he's a guy that needs to get back on the horse. And I think he needs a big outing against K-State just to regain some confidence.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said there. I think, it's a really good way to put it, where the mental side and the work ethic side and the experience side, we're not worried about any of that stuff because we know Tristan's one of those guys. We know how much he cares. We know how hard he's going to work, and we know he can respond to, a couple bad starts. The mechanical side is what confuses me and worries me just a little bit more. I'm a little surprised just to hear he's had trouble. David Pierce said he lost the feel of his slider. That just surprised me. That's not something you hear too often just in the middle of the season, especially with a guy like Tristan that's thrown so many innings, and the slider's been really consistent for him for his pretty much in his entire career. So when I hear he's having trouble with the slider and that he's, getting around it, he's not getting on top of it, it does concern me a little bit because, I mean, you mentioned it. He needs to be able to strike out some guys, especially right-handed batters. If you're going to throw all sinkers, all two-seam fastballs to right-handed batters, they're eventually going to get their good swings off. So even if they don't barrel it, they're going to hit it hard enough to where the ball might find a hole. But if you're just mixing in a slider, you can get some swing and miss. You can get some pop-ups when the bat slows down. So that's a really big pitch for him. And I mean, that is the number one thing that Texas needs to turn around right now. Before we talked about they need Aaron Nixon, they need him to get going if they really want to be a contender. But without Tristan Stevens, they are really going to struggle to make it out of a regional or compete for a Big 12 title. So definitely a guy that they will need to turn it around. But I think he likely will. But yeah, it'll be a big start for him on Friday this week.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if they don't let him, or if Allen doesn't work with him on his rhythm just a little bit, because he can get too fast at times. Down in Houston, he admitted like he had to take a step back and just kind of, take a moment. And so again, I don't know if it's purely mechanical or what's causing him to lose that feel for the slider and come over the top properly. But if I were him, I in the bullpen, I'd start working on rhythm just a little bit, maybe slow down. He's got to find it, and Texas desperately needs a Saturday starter at this point after the loss of Witt on Sunday. So,
yeah, no doubt. It'll be interesting to see how he responds. Hopefully it goes well. Sunday, though, it was a big series win for Texas. Nothing really crazy happened. They kind of just grinded their way to a win. That's what Coach Pierce said after the game. Lucas Gordon was solid. He went 5 and change. He allowed just a couple runs. That's kind of the start that's kind of the average Lucas Gordon start that I expect to see a lot throughout the year. And I think it's one that, you got to take if you're a Texas fan. 5 or 6 innings from Lucas Gordon, 2 or 3 runs allowed. He's talked about in the past how his goal is always just to give his team a chance to win. Well, if you go 5 or 6 innings and you allow 2 or 3 runs, you gave your team a chance to win. That's what he did on Sunday. And if he can just continue to do that, Texas will be able to pick up enough wins on Sunday, when they really need them, like they did this past weekend against TCU.
Yeah, I think Lucas is a guy that, he's got really good stuff. Like Hansen, he's not overpowering, but he knows how to attack the zone and he knows how to move it in and out pretty well. Again, not necessarily the same level of execution as Pete. He does get his changeup elevated at times, especially as he gets further into the count. He leaves a fastball up in there, but he's a guy that, again, if he can give 6 runnings of 2-run ball for Texas every single Sunday, Texas with their hitting is going to be able they're going to be in the game to have a chance to win it for sure. So I think this week's another really big week for Gordon, just to continue building that confidence, because he was a starter all throughout high school. Last year spent all of his time in the bullpen, and so this year, this is only his 4th start of the season or 5th start of the season, and so he it's all about repetition for him at this point. Being on the road, starting again, he's just got to keep working and grinding. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, a sweep would have been great over the weekend, but when you can take 2 out of 3 against TCU, a ranked team, conference opponent, you got to take it, and that's what Texas was able to do. And another thing about this weekend, the bullpen, Zach, looked a little bit better. I mentioned in the past they've been due for a little bit of positive regression, and that's what we saw. They covered a lot of innings on Saturday. They covered a few innings on Sunday, and they only gave up a few runs over the weekend. Most of the guys were pretty solid. Nixon showed a little bit again. But on the theme of the bullpen, I wanted to do something a little bit different today. And we're going to do a little bit of a bullpen power ranking segment. So I wanted to be very specific to make sure we are both under the same set of rules and mindset. So here's the scenario I gave to you. We are going to rank in order the 5 relievers that we trust the most. So 1 being the guy that we really trust. All right, here's the situation. It's the 8th inning. The game's tied. There's a runner on first, and there's nobody out. So you got to bring in a guy to strand that runner, keep the game tied, give Texas a chance to win it in the ninth. And that's the criteria we're going to go off. Zach, we have not talked about these lists. We have not seen each other's lists. So with that, do you want to go 1 through 5 or do you want to go 5 through 1?
Let's go 1 through 5. Let's go from the top. Most confidence.
All right, most confidence. And then just to clarify, Justin Eckert, he's been a Saturday starter, but he also pitches in the bullpen sometimes. He'll be a guy that'll likely be in the bullpen for the postseason. So we did make him eligible for this discussion. But we'll go 1 through 5, starting with most confident. I'll give you mine. The guy I'm most confident in that situation, 8th inning, runner on first, nobody out. I'm going to Luke Harrison. He's been really consistent all year. He's the number one guy for me. He's shown the ability to get a big out when he needs to. We know he's really good versus lefties. And more importantly, you get yourself in situations late in the game. Maybe you get a runner on third with 1 out. You get yourself in a jam. You need a guy that can get a strikeout. He can pitch to a strikeout. Harrison's shown the ability to do that throughout the year with that slider, especially against lefties. So I'm going to Luke Harrison in that situation. He's my number one guy.
Yeah, so our minds think identical on this. Luke Harrison is my number one guy as well. He brings a 90-mile-an-hour fastball from the left side. He's got that 75 to 78 breaking ball slider. My only concern with ranking him number one was against some of the teams in the Big 12 who like to do bunts like TCU, West Virginia, OU. It kind of, some of that lefty situational hitting there. But yeah, Luke Harrison as a whole, he'd be the first name out of the pen. He's been sensational. He's a true freshman. Really impressed with his work today, this season so far.
Yeah, he's pitched in a lot of situations throughout the year. So he's got that experience. He's not necessarily a true freshman anymore.
That's true.
He's got some experience in a lot of different situations in a lot of different ballparks. Number 2, and here we are. I didn't know we'd be here at this point in the year, but I'm going with Coy Cobb. The stats speak for themselves. He's been money all year. He didn't pitch very much early in the year. Then once the bullpen really started to struggle, he was a guy that David Pierce and Sean Allen turned to come in, throw strikes. And that's been the biggest thing. We talked about it a lot. We didn't know if he'd be able to throw strikes with that new arm angle. When you drop down to a sidearm slot, it's hard to control a lot of pitches from down there, but he has not been walking people. He's been coming in, pounding the zone. And it is hard to hit from down there because everything's moving. So I've got Coy Cobb number 2.
So I also have an interesting one that I would have not guessed at all at the beginning of the season. I have Lamar grad transfer Marcus Olivares. He's a senior guy. He's got experience. There's nothing flashy about his delivery. He's, full arm slot over the top, but he's got a decent fastball at 88, 89. He's got an okay changeup and a breaking ball, but he's been effective. He's gotten outs when they needed him. He can induce a ground ball or a pop-up. And, if we're looking at limited 1-inning situation, I really have liked Olivares' work ethic. So.
Yeah, I like your point there with the short inning stuff, in this scenario that we're working with, runner on base. He's shown the ability to throw strikes. He hasn't given up too many hits. The numbers speak for themselves. So I do like that call at number 2. Number 3 for me, I do not have Olivares. I'm going back to another freshman. I'm going to Travis Staley. He started off really hot. He kind of regressed there a little bit in the middle of the season at the very beginning of conference play. I think he's starting to get back into form. He's another guy we know can get a strikeout when he really needs it. At the beginning of the year, he would come into the game and just pound fastball. And I think the coaches wanted to see him work his slider a little bit more. And then maybe he took that too far and started relying too much on the slider. He wasn't getting ahead with the fastball nearly as much. But I think he's starting to get back to where he was early in the year, coming in, establishing the zone with his fastball, and then putting guys away with the slider. We saw him get a big out this weekend when he got one of the TCU hitters to roll over to first base in a big situation. So I've got Staley 3rd, but this is when it gets really tough for me to kind of order these relievers.
Yeah. So again, interesting enough, I went to Coy Cobb. He's got that 3/4 arm slot. It just looks funky. It comes out of his hand. It's really hard to pick up the spin rate on his throws. I've looked at him on tape. That new delivery for him, it works. He's never been a guy that's been able to throw strikes efficiently, but this new delivery, he's done really well. He's avoided giving up anything hard. When he does give up hits, they're typically pop-ups or, grounders to Faltini. So the body of work this year has spoken for itself, and Koi Cobb would be my number 3.
Gotcha. No, I do agree with all of that. For me in the 4 slot, I'm going Jared Southard. I know he's a guy that has made UT fans nervous over the year. He's probably got the best stuff in the bullpen besides Aaron Nixon when Aaron Nixon is rolling. Southard's electric. We saw him hit 99, I believe, once this weekend.
Yep.
That was incredible. He's got a really sharp slider. When he's in the zone, he's not going to get hit very much. He's going to get the strikeouts you need. And I really like that about him. It's a bit of a coin flip, but when I get down to number 4 and I need to strand a runner on first base, I'm willing to take my chance here with Southard. He's been trending a little bit more in the positive direction. He had a couple of really good innings in the past couple of weeks. He would be a big guy to emerge out of that Texas bullpen. If he can really get rolling, that would be big for Texas. He's the guy that I slot in here next.
Yeah, I really struggle with 4 and 5 because there's 3 guys that I could have really, like, if I think about the situational hitting, who's up to bat, whether they're a fast runner or, they're a power hitter. For me, I went to who's more likely to get or give up a hit. And so in this instance, I went with Aaron Nixon just because, we saw him for a full inning of work, and then we saw him for a third of an inning of work on Saturday, I guess it was. That full inning of work, he looked really good. He had fastball command. He was hitting 93, 94. He was moving it in out, and it was an intentional movement. It wasn't like he was not being able to locate it. And then if he's always has that nasty slider that he has kind of in his hip pocket, he lost a little bit of that fastball command. And I think that's telling of him right now. Like he's been a little erratic, but when he's on, if I needed one guy to come in and throw, he would be my number 4 guy right now.
Yeah. I mean, if he's on is the key word. I mean, obviously if he's on, he's number 1 for both of us. That hasn't been the case so far this year. I'm going to get to my last pick here in a second. It's not Aaron Nixon. So he didn't make my top 5 right now, but that is not to say that, I don't like Aaron Nixon or I don't believe he can turn it around, because I think he probably still can. I really hope he does. He would be huge out of this Texas bullpen. We know what he's capable of, and seems to be a guy that works really, really hard. He wants to get it right. He obviously cares, and he can still turn it around. So that would be big to see. 5th, I have Marcus Olivares. You had him at 2. I have him down here at 5. The only reason I don't have him as high as you maybe is because he hasn't been put in the high leverage situations yet. He's been kind of early in the game, low leverage spots, and he's looked great in those situations. But like, if we're playing today, as of right now, he's not the first guy or the second guy that I bring in that situation. I just want to see him do it a couple times, but maybe, he'll get that chance soon. And if we do this exercise again, he might, be further up for me. But yeah, I've got Olivares at 5. The stats don't lie. He's been really good all year.
Yeah. And this is where I said, like, my 4, 5, 6.
Yep.
Really, it's interchangeable depending on who's up to bat and what their kind of batting tendencies are. I went with Southard simply because he can regularly hit 98, 99 on the fastball. If you got a guy on first and you need a strikeout, you bring in Southard and just let him throw gas. I love what Staley's done on the year. I think, he did get a little slider happy after the first, beginning of the year. He was just pure fastball. I want to see him mix it up just a little bit more and have a little more life on that fastball at the end. But, it was really hard not to include him. But Southard hitting 99 and just, again, he kind of had a great showing coming out and throwing strikes. That was impressive. So,
yep. No, I like that. He's the guy they really need. So, all right, that'll do it. Just for the review, I went with Luke Harrison, then Koi Cobb, Travis Staley, Jared Southard, and then Marcus Oliveras. Zach, recap your 5 quickly.
Yeah, so I went Harrison, Oliveras, Cobb, and then Nixon and Southard. So,
yep, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in more of these situations. Hey, maybe we'll look up in a couple of weeks and there will be a runner on first in the 8th inning with nobody out, and we will see who David Pierce goes to, and we'll find out more about his rankings, because those are the rankings that really matter for Texas and their fans. So, all right, and with that, we've talked about enough stuff before. It is time to get to the Kansas State series. It is time to get going, Zach. Texas needs a sweep. We'll get to our predictions later. K-State is sitting at the bottom of the Big 12 right now. They're 15-16 overall, 1-8 in conference. Talk a little bit about what K-State's done so far this year, and what we might see from some of their guys.
Yeah, so K-State comes in. I think we've talked about it last week on the show, but what a brutal schedule for those guys. I kind of feel bad for them.
Yeah, we talked about Kansas last week on accident, but yeah, Kansas State was the team that really it's been tough.
Yeah, I mean, they have back-to-back games against who do they kicked it off with TCU, then
Yep.
they have Tech, then they go to they invite Texas in this weekend, and then they go to Oklahoma State. I mean,
It's been
that's your
tough.
entire season right there down the toilet. But yeah, so they're 15 and 16 on overall on the year, 1-8 in conference. They did steal a game from Oklahoma State. Their RPI is a 116, strength of schedule is at 88. So outside of the Big 12, they're really not playing anyone of note. I mean, they're not that great of a team. They had a little mini hitting streak that they went on there a couple weeks ago, but TCU and Tech quietly saw to them just being squashed. You know, the good thing for them in conference is a lot of those games have been pretty close. So they've been able to stay in the game, but they haven't been able to finish it out. And so the back end of their bullpen is still a bit of a mess. They lost Jordan Wicks. That dude was an absolute monster last year and on the Friday night starts for him. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they round out the rest of their Big 12 schedule once they're not playing, 3 top 10 teams in the nation. But since Pierce took over in 2017 of Texas has swept the Wildcats twice, 2017 being one and 2021 being the other. But they've actually lost the series in 2019 and 2018. So, the Wildcats have decent history against Texas over Pierce's career. Last year, Texas scored 8 runs in the 8th inning. Again, Jordan Wicks held them quiet for 7 innings, and then their bullpen just utterly imploded.
Oklahoma. Yeah.
But then on Friday and Saturday, Texas cruised to pretty comfortable wins. So like I said, good news, Jordan Wicks is no longer pitching for them. So Texas doesn't have to worry about that. But yeah, their pitching is a bit of all over the place, which we can get to here in a minute. Do you want to talk about what their stats look like on the year?
Yeah, for sure. I think it was a good call by you, just going back real quick, that a lot of their games have been close. A lot of their series losses. They lost 2 or 3 to Oklahoma State, but they did win one against Oklahoma State, and those 2 losses were close. They had Tech on the ropes this weekend until Jace Young hit a walk-off home run on Sunday. So they have been playing people pretty close, and they do have a good home record. I believe they're 13-3 at home, something like that. They've been very impressive at home this year. Their schedule's been weak. They haven't played anyone that good at home, but still worth noting. As far as the pitching matchups go, this is our best guess of who's going to pitch. They've been kind of all over the map with their rotation, the ordering, who's in the rotation, who's throwing when. But we think it might be Hassel on Thursday. He's kind of a low strikeout guy. He got touched up pretty good by TCU and Oklahoma State. So we'll get to our predictions, but that's a good matchup for Texas with Pete Hansen on a roll right now. And Hassel coming in, getting hit around a little bit by a couple of Big 12 teams. Corstino, he might pitch on Friday against Tristan Stevens. He's a strike thrower. He hasn't walked many guys all year, but he hasn't gone deep into games. They don't ask much of him. They go to the bullpen pretty early during his starts. So it'll be big for Texas to be able to hit against the Kansas State bullpen in that matchup. And then Saturday, they've got McCullough, pretty standard Sunday guy. He'll go out there, give you a few innings, try not to give up too many runs. Nothing really interesting to point out about him, but that's who we might see. Follow us on Twitter and Orange Bloods to find out when the official pitching rotation comes out. That should be happening in the next couple of days. But yeah, that's it from the pitching matchups there. Zach, you want to talk a little bit more about some of the hitters in this lineup? I noticed they do have a couple hitters that do have some pretty nice numbers so far this year.
Yeah. And then one other thing on the pitching staff, they got a transfer from Arkansas, Adams, who came in, and he was their Friday night guy to start off the season. But for whatever reason, I don't know if I know he had a couple of rough outings recently. They moved him once they got into conference into the bullpen role. He is a switch hitter. He's a 2-position player. He also hits. Right. But I fully expect Texas to see him in long relief at some point this weekend, possibly on Saturday or on Friday, I guess, because the games are moved up a day. Like you said, Corstino doesn't go long. The other guy that you'll see a lot of is Fajardo, I assume his name is spelled, and then Rothermel. Both of them have started games on weekdays for them. So they they've really utilized their their pitching talents kind of all over the place. There's not a lot of concrete roles other than McCullough, which you mentioned on the side. He's going to pitch Saturday. He's been their back end guy now for a while. Hitting wise, they've got decent numbers. They're hitting 289 on the year with an OPS of 065. They got 42 homers, so they can launch the ball out. A lot of these guys are JUCO and or transfers. Interestingly enough, a lot of them are transfers from in the Big 12. You got Dominic Johnson, who leads the way. He's hitting 392 with 4 home runs. He transferred from Oklahoma State. He's also a guy that likes to run a lot. So, keep him on. He'll be at the top of the lineup undoubtedly and looking to get on base and move over. Cole Johnson, he's a TCU transfer. He never appeared in a game for TCU, but he was there for Schlossnagel's last season. He's hitting 349 and he has 3 home runs. And then their big gun, if you will, is Dylan Phillips. He's hitting 328. He's got 9 home runs. He does strike out at a decent rate, but when you got 9 home runs, that's somewhat to be expected. And he was a preseason All Big 12 player, and he was also Player of the Week back in April 5th. So he's a guy that knows how to hit. So, but Texas should be pretty familiar with some of these guys. Justin Mitchell, he plays catcher. He was a 4-year letterman at OU. Orlando Salinas, he plays outfield, I believe it is. He transferred from Okie State. I mentioned Blake Adams. He also hits and pitches. He transferred from Arkansas. And then, I don't know if you remember him, but Jeff Heinrich, he transferred from South Carolina. He was a 3-year player. So he played against Texas last year for the Gamecocks in Austin. So there should be a lot of familiarity between the two teams at this point.
Yeah, Texas should be able to establish a good scouting report and a good game plan going against these guys. So it'll be up to the players to go out and execute those game plans.
For sure.
It'll be an interesting series. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Zach, let's get to the picks. Not going to bury the lead here. I still have not missed a pick since we've gotten to Big 12 play. I have nailed all 3 series on the head, the winner and the exact amount of games. So with that being said, I would love to pick Texas to sweep here, but I'm still at the point where I don't trust the pitching staff enough to do that on the road. If this series was at UFCU Dish-Falk, I would be picking Texas to win 2 out of 3. K-State's been frisky enough, especially at home. I'm going to say Texas wins 2 out of 3 this weekend.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that Texas is going to struggle to sweep all year. Being in Manhattan especially is going to make it more tough because K-State's, they've done well at home.
Yep.
For me, though, it's about the short week. We probably shouldn't give him the benefit of the doubt just because 2 of his last 3 have not been great, but I think Tristan's going to come out and dominate on Saturday.
Yeah.
I think he's going to put them in a place to win the game. I think Hansen wins, I think he can shut down K-State's lineup. And then it really comes down to Gordon and what he can do. I think that left-handed matchup is going to be big. I think McCullough will keep them in the game, but I think ultimately Texas has a better hitting team than what they faced so far. And so granted, they lost to Tech and Lubbock, which is, a hitter's dream, right? But I'm going to go back to a sweep this weekend. I think Texas has the ability. I think it really comes down to, as you said, the bullpen. But against TCU, Texas bullpen only gave up 2, maybe 3 runs in 11 innings, which
2, I believe. Yeah,
not terrible. That's an improvement. So, if Hansen can go 6 or 7, and then if Stevens can start off and just kind of build into it, I think Texas can sweep this weekend. So I'll go with that. I shouldn't pick against you, but I'm going to.
No. I mean, I hope you're right and I'm wrong. I like the call there with Hansen, with Stevens, with Gordon. They all should be fine. They definitely have the ability. You said that. There's no doubt about that. For me, it's just like the bullpen was really good this past weekend against TCU. They're trending in the positive direction. We just spent 20 minutes ranking random relievers, but on the road is still a little bit of a different story for me as far as the walks and the situational stuff. So I'm going to go 2 out of 3, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And Zach, we are moving along here. The Big 12 picture, it's kind of chaotic. Texas is sitting in 5th right now by percentage points. Not everyone has played the same amount of games. Obviously, the schedules have been mixed up. But let's quickly here go through some Big 12 big picture stuff. You can take us through the standings and who has a tough schedule here, who kind of has a really good shot to maybe hang on to the top, and then what are the teams that might get bit by a really tough late season schedule?
Yeah, so the current standings right now, West Virginia is sitting at 5-1. They've obviously played one less series than everyone else.
Yep.
They still have a I have them as the number 2 tough schedule, and we'll get to the schedules in a moment. But first, it's West Virginia at 5-1. Then Tech is at 7-2. Oklahoma State's at 7-2. TCU's at 7-5. Texas is at 5-4. OU is at 4-5. Baylor's at 2-7. Kansas is at 1-5, and K-State's at 1-8. For me, when I look at what 2021 shaped out to be, and I looked at 2019 and look at 2018, somewhere in that 17 to 16 range is what's going to help win you a Big 12 conference. There's a lot of parity. It's hard to sweep on the road, so it just doesn't happen very often. And so in 2021, Texas went 17-7 and won the conference. Obviously, TCU did as well. Texas beat them 2-1, just like this year. But Texas also, interestingly, they won all but one of their series, which also happened to be Texas Tech. They have both went 1-2 against. But that means if you do lose a series, you have to pick up a sweep, at least one during the season.
Somewhere.
Somewhere it's got to occur. So last year, Texas picked up sweeps over Kansas State and Kansas. This season they've mirrored what they did last season so far. They went 2-1 against TCU, 2-1 against OU, 1-2 against Tech. If they can continue to mirror what they did last year, they will put themselves very firmly in the Big 12 race. Oklahoma State for me sits at 7-2. They're in third place. But if I look at the matrix of away series remaining, home series, and the number of ranked teams they still have to play, to me, Oklahoma State has the toughest schedule. They still have at West Virginia. They have TCU at home. They play at Texas. They have Tech at home. And then they play at Baylor to end the season. I don't see any sweeps in there. I in fact see maybe a couple of losses, if any, series losses, if anything else, because their hitting hasn't been great. The surprise of the Big 12 so far is West Virginia sitting at 5-1. To me, they have the number 2 toughest schedule remaining, just simply based on who they get at home and who they don't. So they get Oklahoma State and Texas at home. They do have to travel to Tech and to Kansas and to OU, and then they finish off with K-State. So that last series against K-State could be huge for them, depending on what happens earlier. Baylor, I got bad news for you guys. Y'all are 2-7, and you get KU at home, which is great, but then you have back-to-back weekends at Texas and then versus Tech. That spells trouble for the Bears. And then they still have at K-State and versus Oklahoma State. So nothing happening for the Bears. Y'all can expect to sit down in the 3 or 4 spot. Texas Tech, they are 7-2. I think they probably have the best shot as it currently sits to win the Big 12, simply due to the fact that they beat Texas. They're at TCU. They're home against West Virginia. They're at Baylor, and they're at Oklahoma State, and then OU. So they've got some tough series ahead, but
they've already played the Kansas schools. So that's a big part of it. Texas Tech can't feast on the Kansas schools anymore. I was going to say the same thing as you. Tech kind of stands out to me as a team that might be able to stay at the top and push Texas and push West Virginia, those other teams. But I'll let you keep going, but I definitely agree with you on Texas Tech. They have an interesting schedule, and they do pose a serious threat just because they're 7-2 right now.
They pose a serious threat, but I think the biggest thing for them is they're at TCU and at Oklahoma State. And I think that does not bode well for them because they have not found a Sunday starter yet. Molina, who started against Texas and did so poorly, he was actually demoted this past weekend and he did not start. So I don't see a lot of series sweeps for them either. So, the good news for Texas, if you're looking at these schedules, is there's not going to be a lot of sweeps in there for the guys that are above them. Then you get down into the TCU squad, who realistically their season is probably pretty well toast. They got Texas and Oklahoma at Oklahoma State back to back. That pretty much should put them out of the Big 12 title picture if you look at historical records. And then you get Texas, and I have Texas as the number 8 most favorable conference schedule.
Yeah. So an easy
Got-
schedule down the stretch. Yeah.
Yeah, they got at Kansas State, which is winnable for sure.
Yep.
They got Baylor at home and then Oklahoma State at home, which is massive.
Yeah.
Then they're at West Virginia, and then they invite KU in on the last weekend. That at West Virginia right now looks like a really interesting one. I have a note somewhere around here, but West Virginia is currently 102 for 129 on the stolen bases. They can freaking run. They're not a great hitting team. They're hitting 267, but if you let them on base, they're moving. So that'll be fun to watch. Silas is gonna, need to ice up that arm beforehand.
Yeah, no, I mean, we talked about how they stole home multiple times against TCU. I mean,
yeah,
they're a bunch of running fools, but yeah, no, I mean, I think the equation's pretty simple for Texas down the stretch here. They need to win the series against Kansas State. They need to win the series at home against Oklahoma State, and they need to win the series on the road at West Virginia. And then they might need to sweep Baylor and Kansas both at home. And I think that's a realistic way to look at it.
Yeah.
All those things happening might be unrealistic, but each of those individually could certainly happen. And if that does happen, that'll give Texas a good shot based on kind of what we're projecting and what's happened so far in the league.
Yeah, I mean, based on what I see, K-State, Baylor, and KU's obviously probably the easiest sweep at home last week and everything to fight for. Baylor being at home is probably, beneficial. They've been really bad as well. They've got some really nice pieces, but they haven't been able to put it together. And then K-State, like you said, on this weekend on the road. So it'll be interesting to see. They really can't afford another series loss because if you lose one more series, you've got to pick up another sweep somewhere. So
yeah,
we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, at 5-4, they are running out of margin for error, so they can't afford too many more losses. They can't give away any games late. But a little bit of a broader look outside of the Big 12, Zach. Before we get out of here, let's briefly hit on some series to watch. We've got ACC baseball, we've got SEC. There's a lot of good series this weekend, so I'll let you get us started here and some of the ones that you're going to be really locked in on.
Yeah, so talk about jam-packed weekend. There's a lot of great baseball out there. Set up a second monitor, put on another TV, just watch some great college baseball. But I think the most interesting game I have on there at the top is number 2 Miami versus number 21 Vatech. Miami is on a roll. Those guys are hot. I mean, they just swept Virginia. They've won a couple of ACC series.
Yeah, they've swept 3 straight series in the ACC, which is not easy to do.
Not easy to do. Vatech is a hitting fool. I mean, those guys can hit. Just like seems like everyone in the ACC can hit this year. They've got a couple good series win. They started off a little shaky, but they did beat Notre Dame in one game, and then the other 2 were canceled due to weather. But I'm interested to see if Vatech can kind of cool off Miami or if the Canes stay hot. So that was my number 1.
Yep.
The number 2 one I want to watch is Arkansas, who's number 6, versus LSU, who's number 15.
It's a big one.
Arkansas just lost at home. I mean, they lost 2 of 3. LSU's been a little bit on fire. They completely shifted their pitching staff around. They've completely looks different than what Texas saw. So I think LSU took 2 of 3 from Florida this past weekend. Oh no, they swept Mississippi State.
Yeah, they swept Mississippi State.
They took 2 of 3 from Florida. Yeah.
Florida took 2 of 3 from Arkansas. But yeah, LSU, I mean, we know the top of their order. We talked about it before the Shriners. They've got those 4 guys at the top. They all have OPS over 1,000. But you mentioned it, man. The pitching staff is still kind of in flux. They're switching things around. Some of it's working, some of it's not. Blake Money has kind of regressed. He had a little bit of an injury scare there. He came back and has not been as sharp. I still think the pitching staff is ultimately going to hold them back. It'd be hard to see them make it through a regional and a super regional with just a lot of unreliable arms. But man, they can dash the ball around. It'll be interesting to see how they match up with Arkansas. Yeah,
and they've got a couple potential injury issues as well. So a couple of their hitters have been out. This one is more so just because of the Big 12 race, but number 4 Texas Tech versus TCU, who just got dropped out of the rankings. Look, the Frogs have lost 2 series in a row, one at home to West Virginia, and then obviously at Texas. Are they able to come in and steal 2 from Tech? I think they probably have some of the pitching pieces, but I don't know if they can. I don't know if they can pull it off against Texas Tech. It'll be interesting to see. So
that'll be a close one. I think TCU might be able to sneak one there. Just because we know it's at TCU, so that'll make it interesting.
Texas Tech still has huge Sunday starter questions, which I think is going to plague them the rest of the year and could really affect them going into a super regional. If they continue to lose Saturday games, they could lose a series pretty easily.
Yep.
And then heading out west, number 12 UCLA, who we obviously saw down in Houston. For Stanford, the Bruins have been hot. The young pups, they're killing it. Stanford, they've got a great pitching rotation. They have absolutely no one in relief in the bullpen. So do they have enough pitching to keep UCLA off balance? I think that's a big one for the Pac-12 and really national rankings, because UCLA is kind of a quiet favorite to sneak into the top 8 right now. They've got some big wins. Going back to the Big 12, number 5 Okie State is playing versus West Virginia. Can the Mountaineers keep it up? They swept Baylor. They took 2 of 3 from TCU. Yeah, I could definitely see them not just stealing a game. They could steal a series, because Oklahoma State didn't look impressive against Oklahoma. So that one's big for the top of the standings. And then going back to the ACC, number 9 Louisville versus Florida State. And then the Noles have looked terrible. They've always been known as a hitting squad. This year they can pitch, but they can't hit for a lick. They got dropped out of the top 25. Can they bounce back and upset Louisville, who's, they've had some hot and cold moments, but for the most part, they've been doing pretty well.
Yeah, the ACC has a lot of really good pitching staffs. I was looking at the strikeout to walk ratios just for the entire conference, and really strong top to bottom. So, if you're going to score runs in the ACC, you're going to have to earn them, because there's not many freebies being given out. And then there's a lot of guys that can get big strikeouts, when runners do get in scoring position.
Yeah, no doubt. And then heading over the SEC for the last two, Florida, who sits at number 23 versus unranked Vanderbilt. When's the last time Vanderbilt was unranked? I believe they've lost 3 series in a row after beating Missouri in the first one. So that's talk about a free fall this year. Them and Mississippi State have just suffered, but it goes to show how much talent they had on last year's squads. And then the last game, I'm invested in it because it's number 1 Tennessee Volunteers versus number 24 Bama. That's awesome that Bama's ranked. We saw them in Austin at the beginning of the season. They've got a really nice rotation. Can they keep the pitches inside the park, though? They're playing in Knoxville.
Yeah, and that's always tough.
What's going on with those? Are the stickers going to keep falling off the bats, or are they?
Oh boy. Oh boy. Zach said it, not me. Yeah, no, Tennessee at home is a monster, but we were both really impressed by the Alabama pitching staff, coming away from that series. I know it was literally 4 degrees, but at the same time, they were pretty good. They were throwing strikes.
Yeah. So, that for me is just an interesting one, because we saw Volunteers, their lone loss comes to Texas down in Houston, and then Texas swept Bama, but it was very, very close in all 3 games. So,
yep.
Like I said, 8 awesome games to watch this weekend.
Yeah, a lot of good series. They'll all be, taking place Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and you can hang out with the family on Sunday, on Easter Sunday. Check out all the good action we got going on over at orangebloods.com. We've got all kinds of stuff, game day threads, recaps, weekday series. The YouTube channel, as always, please subscribe, leave comments. That always helps us out. We like interacting with everyone. And then Twitter, follow us on Twitter. You can catch me at Aaron Little OB. You can find Zach at the Dish. He's always posting a lot of GIFs. He's the GIF master. So that is for sure. But with that, I think it's time to get out of here. We've talked about a lot of college baseball. Hopefully everyone got their fix in, and then we will see everyone next week on another episode of Around the Horns. So yeah, hook 'em.
Awesome. Hook 'em.